For years, people parked their cars over the grave of an English king. That sounds like a cheap twist. It is also true. Richard III spent more than 5 centuries under the streets of Leicester, while the story of his life lived somewhere else entirely in plays, in portraits, in school books written by the people who beat him. He is remembered as a hunchbacked tyrant, a child killer, a man built wrong from the inside out. But when archaeologists finally opened the ground, the skeleton they found did not match the legend, and then the DNA inside it raised a problem nobody was looking for. Richard died in 1485 at the Battle of Bosworth, the last English king to fall in battle. The men who killed him, the Tudors, had a problem of their own. Their claim to the throne was thin, and a weak claim needs a strong enemy. So Richard was not allowed to stay a defeated king. He became a useful one, the unnatural king, the warning. A century later, Shakespeare gave that version a voice and a shape, a crooked spine, a withered arm, a soul to match the body. For a long time, no one had reason to doubt it. For a long time, no one had the body either. That is what made the case strange. People argued about Richard for centuries, but the main witness was missing. His remains were tied to a lost friary in Leicester, a building torn down, paved over, forgotten under a changing city. A historian named Philippa Langley spent years laying medieval maps over the modern street grid. One spot kept coming back, an ordinary council car park. In 2012, a University of Leicester team cut a trench through the asphalt. On the first day, they struck human bone, and the grave was wrong, too short for the body folded into it, the skull shoved up against the wall of the pit. This was not a burial meant to honor anyone. It was a fast job after a violent death. But a skeleton in a car park is just a skeleton. The real question was never only whether these bones were Richard's, it was what 5 centuries of silence, written first into bone, then into blood, could finally be made to say. The bones spoke first. They belonged to a man in his early 30s. Richard died at 32. The skull carried serious wounds, the kind left by close combat, including a blow from behind that would have been fatal. Everything fit a king cut down at the end of a lost battle. Then there was the spine. It curved hard to one side. Not the cartoon hump from the stage, but scoliosis, a real condition that had set in during his teens and lifted one shoulder above the other. Here, the legend started to come apart. Shakespeare's monster was not pure invention. It was a real, painful condition stretched into an accusation. Richard was not built wrong. He was a young man with a disability who still strapped himself into steel armor, climbed onto a warhorse, and fought until someone killed him. But a curved spine and old wounds only take you so far. They were circumstantial. Plenty of men died violently in that century. To turn possible into certain, the team needed the one thing the Tudors, Shakespeare, and every later historian never had: the genetic code of the man himself. Pulling DNA from bone that has sat in wet clay for 500 years is brutally hard. A single hair from a researcher can ruin the result. So the scientists started with mitochondrial DNA, a signature passed down the maternal line, mother to child, almost unchanged, forming an unbroken chain of women that can run for 1,000 years. Richard left no legitimate children, but he had an elder sister, Anne of York, and her female line kept going daughter to daughter through marriages, name changes, and dead ends. Genealogists followed it across roughly 500 years until it reached living. One of them was Michael Ibsen, a London cabinet maker born in Canada who had no idea his blood carried a dead king's signature. He gave a cheek swab. The lab placed his DNA next to the fragile, fragmented code from the skeleton. It matched, not on its own, but on top of everything else. The place was right, the age was right, the wounds were right, the spine was right, and now the maternal line was right too. Together, the odds of coincidence fell to almost nothing. The researchers put their confidence above 99.9%. The skeleton under the parking lot was Richard III. After more than 500 years, the lost king had a body again. That could have been the ending, and it would still have been remarkable. Instead, the team ran one more test, and this one looked the other way down the family tree. This time the target was the Y chromosome, passed from father to son. For a royal house, that line was everything, not because DNA makes a good ruler, but because dynasties were built on the promise of clean male descent, father to son, name to name, crown to crown. Richard was a Plantagenet, and the Plantagenets had ruled England for 3 centuries on exactly that promise. So researchers found living men who, on paper, shared his paternal line, traced back to a common royal ancestor. Their Y chromosomes and Richard's should have matched. They did not. A flat mismatch. Somewhere in the generations linking Richard to his royal cousins, the recorded line and the biological line had quietly split. The test pointed at no one. It revealed no bedroom and named no scandal. It simply showed the break. At some point, paper and blood had stopped telling the same story. Here is the part worth sitting with. The DNA cannot say where the break happened. It could sit anywhere across roughly 19 generations, which makes the consequences either trivial or enormous, and leaves us no way to choose. If the broken link falls early enough, then by blood, some of England's most famous kings may not have been Plantagenets at all. A royal house that fought a long, ruinous civil war over a crown its own genetics could not fully back. Researchers stress this is only one possibility. The break could just as easily hide in a forgotten side branch and change nothing at all. But that uncertainty is the point. The bloodline England treated as sacred carried at least one secret it could never quite account for. And the doubt does not stop at the bloodline. It reaches the most notorious crime ever laid at Richard's feet. That corner is the Tower of London, and the 2 boys held inside it, the young sons of Edward IV. For centuries, their disappearance was pinned on Richard, but the logic phrase, Richard had already had the boys declared illegitimate in law. They were no longer rivals for his crown. The man with the stronger reason to want them gone came later. He won at Bosworth, married their sister to shore up a thin claim of his own, and then reversed that ruling, making the boys legitimate again, and a threat to him. That man was Henry VII, the first Tudor king. Some historians argue he had far more to lose if they lived. The DNA names no killer. It only refuses to let the old, convenient story stand unchallenged. So, what was actually solved under that car park? Not just the location of a missing king. The bigger find was how much of Richard had been built without him. The bones did not hand back a hero. They did not hand back a villain either. They handed back a correction. A real medical condition had been turned into a sign of evil. A rushed grave had been lost under a modern city. A family tree that looked clean on paper turned out to be more complicated in biology. None of that destroys the history. It makes it more honest. After 500 years of being described by his enemies, the man under the asphalt finally got to answer back.